Today, Bungie held their live stream for episode Heresy Act 2. Of course, right now we're in the final week of Act 1, and it may be the nostalgia, but Heresy seems to have done pretty well as an episode so far, compared to what we've had so far this year. So players are certainly looking for that momentum to continue, hopefully, as we head into Act 2. So in this video, we're going to round up everything Bungie have spoken about today regarding the upcoming content for Act 2 that'll drop on March 11th. So we get new activities. As always, Bungie will add more episode rewards, weapons, as well as additional cosmetic things that we'll find throughout. Importantly though, we kind of get a better idea of what the core game around Heresy will actually be for the 3-week duration of Act 2, so this is going to be a pretty short act. Bungie speak about that a little bit, as well as teasing some of the Act 3 content, so we're pretty much getting the lowdown here on the rest of the juice for Heresy. So if you guys enjoy the roundup, a rating below really does help us out. Share your thoughts in the comments as always as well, but now let's get into it. So firstly, I should say, we get a lot of information about upcoming content for the remainder of Heresy right here. Firstly, they speak about Act 2 of Heresy, where the Eris storyline will resume, essentially. So we'll be hearing some whispers from beyond the veil as we explore more through the Dreadnought and the new activity. And the devs tease that we'll receive messages from an Ascendant world belonging to Eris, and we'll also be building our relationship further with Oryx. So that will be interesting in itself to see how it pans out. Here though, we get a reveal for the new activity, which is called Court of Blades. This will have both a match-made standard version and an expert version again, which will drop the Adept weapons for Act 2. And it's basically a refreshed Court of Oryx, although the devs say it's shorter, quicker activity than something like the Nether. It's also quite a bit different from Court of Oryx, as we'll be headed through the portal to various different combat spaces. And mechanically, we'll be utilizing augments as well as armaments, so this will be a combination of different sort of sandbox elements, where augments essentially provide challenges that players can overcome in numerous different ways with fairly simple mechanics. And then of course armaments, which are more beneficial to help combat some of the challenges that we'll encounter. We can see that we'll return to Io in some of these encounters, and they say Io is trapped between worlds in the Ascendant Plane. On top of that though, we'll return to Europa and new areas of the Dreadnought during these arenas. And the dev said that the challenges applied to the activity will start to stack the more that we actually play it, and we'll encounter both good and bad combinations of augments and armaments, with the armaments rotating on a daily basis. Fortunately, unlike the Nether, there will be sort of no health regen negation, so it'll feel different in that respect, and they say difficulty will escalate after every 2 challenges that we defeat, so we're basically in and out of the portal, heading into numerous different boss fights in kind of a faster paced activity than what we had with the Nether. So that's the brief explanation of it. We can see a bit of gameplay of it right here. But connected to that, they say that the Shaping Slab will get new ranks and upgrades for Act 2, and Court will get a whole set of unique upgrades of its own. So this will be the primary way to get the new weapons introduced for Act 2, and Bungie had previously said they'll introduce the remaining weapons that weren't released at the initial launch of Heresy. So they'll include things like the kinetic slot strand glaive, as well as the bow and fusion rifle that were dropping early in Act 1. On a separate note, the Void rocket sidearm, the Lotus Eater, will also be dropping next week from Nightfalls. I guess they said that given the disappointment that we don't have it this week. So in terms of legendary weapons, we'll be pretty busy. We have previously spoken about the Act 2 Heresy weapons, the perk rolls and things like that, so we won't go into it in a massive amount of detail right here. But further exploring the Dreadnought, both on the Nether and presumably in the Court of Blades, Barrow.yad exotic upgrades will begin rolling out. So essentially they've said we'll be getting 2 Catalyst perks in Act 2, both of them available on week 1. And we know that there's an element of questification for those upgrades, so we'll kind of run into them as we play through the Act 2 content. Given that Act 2 is only a couple of weeks long though, we will get more of those Catalyst upgrades in Act 3. As always though, we'll get more artifact perks for Act 2, and this will focus heavily on trace rifles, so there'll be overload trace rifles, and then things like Beam Medic and Rapid Trace Rifle Final Blows heal you and nearby allies, and powerful combatants increase the amount. They also show Harsh Refraction, where trace rifles do more damage to targets afflicted by elemental debuffs matching their element type, as well as Limit Break, and casting a super while you're critically wounded or have an elemental buff matching your super element will grant a period of increased super damage. plus Elemental Siphon, where rapid final blows with a kinetic weapon or a weapon matching your equipped super create an elemental pickup that matches your equipped super. So some interesting ones, given, of course, that we have a few trace rifles this episode. They also tease the synergy naturally with some of these bonuses and things like the microcosm, so that'll be pretty interesting to check out. But beyond that, for Act 3, we didn't get a ton of details, but they said it will focus on artifact perks for rockets, so that'll be cool. Worth keeping in mind that Act 3 will only be 3 weeks after the launch of Act 2, so we won't really have to wait very long. And then for Act 3, they give a bunch of teasers here, and they say there'll be a refresh for the Nether and Court of Blades, as well as new bosses and combatants for those activities, plus Act 3 will see the return of the Sunless Cell Strike. There have been leaks about that previously. It'll be interesting to see the kind of narrative component and, of course, the reward part there, but it will feature this time a new boss as opposed to the Darkblade who became the Lightblade. So that'll be a cool component. I think also that will be a Grandmaster this episode, so that's pretty cool. And they kind of moved through the bulk of the Act 2 and 3 activity content reasonably quickly to make way to speak about a new event that's coming in Act 3, which will be free for all players, featuring rewards for lower skill and higher skill players, essentially. And this is called Rite of the Night. So it'll be dropping later in Act 3, and it's a limited time event featuring 3 dungeons. Prophecy, Spire of the Watcher, and Ghost of the Deep will be the focus for this, and it's essentially a mix between Pantheon and contest modes, but for dungeons, so it's a dungeon Pantheon in a way. And we can see that the third Spire trial space will return, and there we'll interact with the Emissary of the Nine, who will grant rewards for completing objectives and quests. And 4 weapons from each of these dungeons will get a big revamp with new perks, plus the ability to attune to them when they're featured each week. So we'll get 1 dungeon featured on each weekly reset, and there'll be 3 different difficulty versions of this. So there'll be an expert mode, basically, as well as a middle of the pack mode, which is somewhat similar to dungeons as we know them right now, but also the introduction of an explore mode, which will be an easier version of these dungeons, which Bungie describe as a kind of training ground for dungeons and solo completions. So this is designed for players who don't typically run this kind of content, and it'll feature tooltips to assist with mechanics, waypoints that explain pathways and puzzles, and we'll see the removal of darkness phases and revive timers in that particular version. Then we'll see Eternity Mode, which is the middle of the pack version, somewhat similar to normal dungeons right now, as well as Ultimatum Mode, which is the most challenging version, essentially on the level of Contest Mode. But in terms of rewards, higher tier completions will grant double perk weapons and adept versions of the weapons. So we can see they do have a new visual treatment with the 9 aesthetic and an exclusive origin trait, which is called Gravity Well, and reloading the weapon will automatically gather nearby ammo, which is pretty cool. So again, there'll be adept and normal versions of these. The more we play it and the harder the version that we play, basically, the better the rewards will be. On top of that, there'll be 5 new emblems, an earnable weapon cosmetic, which I assume is a memento, and an exclusive event title. So this is very much Pantheon, but for dungeons. Like I say, this will be later on in Act 3, so it kind of reminds me of Pantheon when we got it last year, and how that was bridging the gap heading into or towards the next expansion. So maybe that's what we're looking at right here. We don't have a release date for Frontiers yet, but there's quite a lot of content that will come between now and then. So give us your thoughts on that. I do think it seems to be a pretty good idea, and I'm sure lots of players who don't normally run dungeons will engage with that, but it's also something for hardcore players with adept rewards and stuff. So I think that sounds pretty exciting, and let us know your thoughts on it below. Another component, which was kind of a surprise, but Bungie will introduce a limited time PvP mode in Act 3 called Heavy Metal. Again, it will be later on in Act 3 by the sounds of it, but it's basically a team of Drake tanks versus a team of Briggs. So for the first time, we'll be able to control a brig. I don't think it will necessarily play as well as Titanfall or something, but we might get a bit of that vibe, if not rather more haphazard. Basically, they said it's not a sweaty PvP mode, but something that's supposed to be fun. It sounds like it's a bit of a work in progress at the moment, so again, later on in Act 3, that will drop as another unexpected component alongside the Rite of the Nine event. So some juicy stuff coming down the road. Also, Guardian Games is coming in Act 2, and it will start next week alongside the launch of the Act. So it's going to be a busy one. Lotus Eaters drop in. We get the new Court of Blades activity, the new Heresy weapons, Barrow Dyad upgrades, and indeed Guardian Games as well. They show off the armor right here. They do say it will be an Eververse set, in the way that we typically get event sets. And then there'll be a new trace rifle, which they say is a sort of PvE-focused weapon, where we can get perks like Overflow and Triple Tap in the first column, paired up with things like Detonator Beam, Jolting Feedback, Rolling Storm, and double perk versions of these drop in for higher tier activity completions, because Guardian Games is actually getting a new game mode of its own, which they describe as a new bite-sized boss rush mode for the event. So that sounds pretty cool. They'll give us more info about it in the Twid later on this week. Otherwise, also a Guardian Games jersey as a Bungie reward this time around. So quite a lot to actually sink in, quite a lot actually come in over the next couple of acts. Obviously, time will tell how fun many of these things are to play. Court of Blades initially, it'll be cool to get the other Heresy weapons added, but later on things will certainly get a bit more interesting with the funky PvP mode and the event, the Rite of the Nine. So give us your thoughts about it, guys. That's what we have to round up for today. I've done my best to give a pretty good picture of what's coming down the road in the shortest amount of time possible, where we can actually speak about the stuff in any amount of detail. So I hope the video has been useful. If it has, a rating below really helps us on the channel. Also get subscribed and I'll keep you posted with all of this stuff when it starts rolling out. Otherwise though, for now, cheers for tuning in and I hope you guys have an awesome day.